Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we're going to talk a lot about what's happening in the local sports scene. And, of course, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with the Saints. We'll talk the Pelicans, and we'll also talk a little bit about what's going on in college baseball. We'll also touch on the failed Super Bowl bid by the city of New Orleans. And to help us out, a great panel for you tonight. Jeff Duncan of the New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com, and my colleague over at WGSO 990 AM, Scott Alexander. Guys, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming down once again.
Yeah, always fun to be here.
Thank you. Jeff, but before we get started, if you would, tell the folks a little bit about NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune.
Well, you can follow all our stuff. We had an army of people out at Saints facility today for their first OTA. We had 12 people out there. Wow, so it just shows you the army of people covering the New Orleans Saints. And I'm heading to Lafayette tomorrow for the NCAA Regionals. I'm excited about that. So it's an exciting time of year.
Yeah, it is. Of course, you've got the Daily Duncan that folks can watch on NOLA.com as well. And, of course, they can also follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, at Jeff Duncan _.
Right. Scotty, loving what you're doing over at WGSO 990 AM. And, of course, tell folks a little bit about your show.
Well, first of all, I feel like the Steve Martin of Saturday Night Live on your show on the first five-timer. Right. But great to be here. Always love coming on the show. You do a great job, by the way. Fantastic work. Hey, this is prime time right now. NBA playoffs are wrapping up. Obviously, Saints starting their OTAs. Baseball's getting going. We got the World Series coming up in a couple of weeks. Got the regionals tomorrow, all weekend long. It's fantastic. Got golf, horse racing. You can't beat this time of year.
Yeah, it is a great time of year. Well, the Saints got some bad news today. At least, well, they've had the news for a while. Let me rephrase that. We got some bad news today. Jairus Byrd, the prize free agent, has a back injury. Supposedly, it is a disc injury. And from what I read in Mike Triplett's column today, it happened during the Pro Bowl. Guys, I'll ask you about it first. The first thing, I got deluged with text and calls about what happened, what's going on. How did he get through a physical, first of all, with having a back injury?
Well, the word of the day from Sean Payton was asymptomatic. So look that one up at home, because he dropped that one about
I've heard that a lot today.
Yeah, he used that about 3 times. We were all scrambling. What does that mean?
I still don't know what it means.
I guess what he's trying to say is this was something that they could have gone and not done. They could have not had surgery on him. He downplayed the significance of it. But let's face it, guys. I mean, 4 months before the season, your prize free agent safety is having back surgery. Anything to do with your back is bad news, especially for football players.
And a disc.
Yeah, in a disc. So let's see how it develops. But I don't think there's anything good about this in the long run for a football player to have anything done with his back. That's the type of surgery you get done right after the season.
Yes.
You get that done after the Pro Bowl. If it did happen in the Pro Bowl, you get it done then.
Right.
But again, it surprised everybody today. They dropped that one on us.
No, I think it surprised everybody. And again, because the media has not has access to the OTAs, there was no way for us to know, and they were going to volunteer that information. With the media out there, they probably had to come clean. Supposedly, Scotty, he inflamed it when he was lifting weights. Your thoughts?
That's the word. The funny part is you talk about when we found out. I drove back late from Atlanta last night, got in late, so I slept in. Usually wake up about 8 and start working. I woke up about 10, and all morning long, I didn't see anything about it. I literally sit down in my chair to do the show because I last looked at online about 12:40, look at your stuff, everybody else. Get in, I'm sitting down at 1 o'clock, and all of a sudden, I'm like, I guess I have a new open because Jairus Byrd's back. When did you find out? Was it during your show, which is right before mine?
It was literally about the last hour of my show, right before we went to, I think, one of my final breaks.
Right.
And I got it over the phone and said, oh, this is not good news. Jairus Byrd is a back injury.
The funny part is if you read the first article I read said, oh, he's going to be back next week. It's no issue. And then the second hour of my show, it's like, well, he's going to miss all minicamp, OTAs, and he'll be back at training camp. I'm like, well, that's a big difference difference. 1 week, 7 weeks. So let's just hope it's just that.
Right. If it was next week, I'd like to know who that back surgeon is, because he's obviously a miracle worker. If you can do back surgery and be back a week later and be involved in lifting weights and getting back in the swing of things with OTAs. This has got to be a red flag now, no matter what. You're talking about a back, you're talking about a safety, you're talking about a guy that obviously is propelling his body constantly. It's a collision sport. No matter whether it's a quote-unquote elective surgery or not, this is something you got to be concerned about.
Well, yeah, anybody that's been around Jay Cicero, the Greater New Orleans Sports Foundation lately, he's having the same problems with his back, and he can hardly walk. Now Sean Payton said this was not something of significance. It was, if this were during the season, they'd have just treated it, he said. They wouldn't even have to have surgery on it. So let's wait and see. I don't want to panic yet,
right.
But it can't be good to have this thing done for a football player playing at that position, especially. I mean, this isn't a kicker. This is a safety, like you said.
A safety, yeah, which again is, Scotty, is this something that fans should worry about, or should let it take its course?
Let it take its course, of course, but I am glad we have two good safeties backing him up just in case. I mean, obviously Kenny Vaccaro is a starter and Raphael Bush, but you want those three to play pretty much a lot because they're going to play five defensive backs quite often. I have to agree with Sean Payton right now. Listen, they know better. If they had any word that this was something that was serious after the Pro Bowl, they know. They give him a physical. That's what made me lead. It was something that happened after he signed. Like maybe it was a weightlifting injury. The Pro Bowl thing may be where it started, and then he tweaked it when he was working out. Regardless, it's something to keep your eye on. But honestly, I'm not really worried about it yet.
You know what I am worried about, and I've talked about it really since the draft is, and guys, I don't know if you agree, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. I'm concerned about the offensive line. Drew Brees hit more than he's ever been hit before last season. You got a situation now where it looks like Tim Lelito, at least right now, is the heir apparent at the center position. A lot of talk, maybe Goodwin will come back and be part of this team. That'd be great. He didn't have the greatest year last year with San Francisco, but yet again, putting him in between two Pro Bowl guards, obviously he can be efficient. Teron Armstead in a situation now where there's a little film on Teron now. When he first started out, obviously it was a little bit difficult, but he got better as the season went on. But now, defensive coordinators had all off season to kind of see what his tendencies are. The physicality is what I'm worried about in terms of the offensive line. Guys, is there a concern there for you? Jeff, you first.
Well, I think the Saints feel like they improved that line with the Teron Armstead move. I think that move was something that was critical for them to get the pass protection down. They'd seen enough of Charles Brown. So I think in that move alone, and let's face it, he should get better. He was thrown to the wolves and against Carolina. But I think more than the starting lineup, I think the depth is a concern.
Yes.
If they get some injuries there, they don't have a lot of experience behind the front five. And really, two of the front five right now, as we know it, don't have experience either, Teron Armstead and Tim Lelito. So I think the jury's out on the front line. And that's an area that I felt they neglected in the draft. I mean, they didn't address it at all. It looked like they were too busy trying to address depth on the defensive side of the ball. And that's an area that you could look at and say, boy, that third-round draft pick they traded away to get Brandon Cooks would have come in handy. You might have been able to get a starting caliber offensive lineman there. So I think the jury's out, yeah.
Well, you might have just quoted what Sean Payton did say about Charles Brown. I've seen enough. Remember, they put him on the shelf, and that first game was fairly horrific for Teron Armstrong, going against Greg Hardy, Charles Johnson, two of the best in the business, right in your own division against Carolina Panthers. Then I saw marked improvement, obviously, through the playoffs. He did play well. So I feel comfortable with him. I really do. The other side, you got to feel good with Zach Street. But that big hole in the middle, man, right now, I mean, Tim Lelito, obviously they like him. I mean, they have a history of undrafted guys on the line or late draft picks doing very well. You just like to have a little more security, don't you?
Right.
I mean, that Jonathan Goodwin thing, we kept waiting to happen. I know I guess, I don't know who has the better leverage now. I thought it was the Saints before the draft. Since now they didn't draft one, I don't know. But the point being is, I'm not very comfortable with it. Drew Brees is not getting any younger, and you have to protect that asset.
No, I would agree. As you mentioned, not a tremendous amount of depth. I think Clemente was the only returning player on the offensive line in terms of depth. Now, they brought some guys in, some undrafted free agents, some guys that are trying out. But you're right, they don't have a tremendous amount of depth back there. And more importantly, the physicality of the offensive line. Again, they've got to come out and they got to not only be able to protect Drew Brees, but they got to show a little bit of physicality in terms of the running game as well. They got better the last part of the season. Can that carry on?
Well, here's something I'd point out. I mean, we all tend to hang our hat on the guards, right?
Yes.
Ben Grubbs and Jari Evans. Those guys didn't play very well last year.
No, they didn't.
Shocking all-pro selections.
Both
honestly.
made the Pro Bowl, and neither one of them played very well.
Popularity contest.
Right. So, they're supposed to be the rocks of this line. And to me, the best player on the offensive line last year was Zach Strief, and he's a limited player. He's a very good player, but he's a guy that knows what he is and can struggle in pass protection at times. So there's really nobody on that front line right now. I think you can say is coming off a great year.
But don't you think even Brandon Cooks will help them look that much better? Honestly, because no one can get open, so it's going to show your deficiencies a little more. That you're not holding your blocks longer. When nobody gets it open, Drew Brees has to hold the ball a little longer. So I think that little bit will help some.
Right.
Well,
That's a great point.
Cam Cameron told me last year down at LSU, he said the first phase of pass protection is receiver separation.
Right.
And the Saints struggled last year. And I think fans and all of us, when we watch the passing game, it's so complicated, it's easy to blame the offensive line for everything. But I think you're right. I think getting that separation is going to help them a lot.
Well, look, I think it's also one of the red flags as we go into the season, the ability for the receivers to get off a jam. They weren't able to do it. Can they do it with quickness with a Brandon Cooks? Can they do it with maybe a quicker Nick Toon if he asserts himself and gets into the lineup? Can Kenny Stills do this? I mean, when you watched Meacham, you watched Colston at times, even Stills at times, they had a tough time getting off the line of scrimmage, and teams now know that's the MO. That's the way to be able to slow down that Saints offense. So they're going to be very, very physical with this wide receiving core.
And they had to play a gauntlet of good defenses last year. That's the best thing they've got going for them this year is they're not playing the NFC West.
No doubt.
Nearly as many games. I mean, their schedule's much more, at least right now, looks more user-friendly. But it's not as daunting. I mean, that defense the defenses they played last year, I think they played 7 games against top 10 defenses a year ago. So that should help them. And Peyton is a master at getting, using bunch formations, alignment, movement to get guys separation at the line of scrimmage. I think he'll do that with Cooks for sure.
Anything you can add, Scott?
No, I agree. I mean, and one thing about Cooks, though, as far as getting separation, you're talking about getting jammed, he's a lot stronger than you think. I watched a lot of Oregon State games. I've been going back looking at footage. 128 catches, 1,700 yards, but it's not just his speed. He's a little sturdier than I think you think. Most time you hear 4.3, you think of just really thin guys that can fly. He's stronger than I imagined. I watched the film on that, and that showed me a little more. I think he's going to be able to separate more than a guy like Kenny Stills.
Plus, he's a guy that's really good in space, much like a Darren Sproles was, and I think that's going to help them as well. And it gives you an opportunity now to maybe give the Saints more speed. When you start looking at some of these young players, if Joe Morgan come back, then maybe we see him with that offensive wide receiving core since Peyton has been here.
Well, he's going to be their perimeter satellite guy. I made the comparison right after the draft to Darren Sproles and Reggie Bush. And I think a lot of people were like, wait, he's a receiver.
Right.
Those guys are running backs, and everybody's gotten caught up in that. That's not the point. The point is whether he lines up 10 yards to the right of center or 4 yards behind him, he's going to be that satellite guy that catches bubble screens. He's going to do a reverse every once in a while. He's going to be used in space much the way those guys were. They don't really have that guy right now unless you're counting on Travaris Cadet to be that guy. I think that's what Cooks is going to be. He's going to be his joker on offense to move around.
And I agree with you. I think it's one of the things that he's utilizing this offense each and every year he's been, whether it's been Bush, whether it's been Sproles, somebody that can dictate where that linebacker, where that safety is going to be, and again, be able to play off of that. It'll also help Jimmy Graham as well in his ability to be able to get off the line of scrimmage and stop the double teams.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, you got me excited talking about that speed because I wasn't even thinking about putting Stills, Morgan, and Cooks in at the same time. Obviously, there's other guys that are more possession guys, but think about the options you have and think about how happy Jimmy Graham is going to be that now he's going to have the middle of the field a little more wide open because he's going to have guys that can get by that safety.
Yeah,
and they're going to have to pay attention to him.
And I think Robert Meacham's going to have a hard time making this team.
It's going to be tough. His best asset, his best attribute was obviously his ability to be able to block in the running game. They can find someone that can do that. I think it's going to be tough for him to make this team.
Well, who makes it, do you think, between him, Nick Toon, and obviously Joe Morgan? Those are your options for those last couple.
I think the jury's out on all three right now, honestly. I mean, you would hope that Nick Toon would finally give you everything you thought he was going to be coming out of Wisconsin, but that's been a slow process. But when you look at when you get down to the nuts and bolts of that receiving core, it's probably going to be out of those three guys.
Well, and Joe Morgan wasn't even working today.
Right.
I mean, here he is still not able to run full speed. I know he's anxious to get out there. Drew Brees talked about it today. He's got to take his time because he can't have another setback. This is make or break for him.
This is it, yes. You're correct.
504-866-3200. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Jeff Duncan of the New Orleans Times-Picayune and Scott Alexander of WGSO 990 AM are our panelists tonight. Let's go to Tony on the West Bank. Tony, welcome. You're on Inside New Orleans Sports.
Yeah, thanks, you guys, for taking my call. I have a quick question. I'm going to go ahead and ask my question, and I'm going to hang up and listen to you guys on the panel there, your comment. But let me ask you a question. I've come home this afternoon from work and then turned on the news and then heard it on the radio throughout the day. What's the deal with the defensive back, Bird, that we got from the Buffalo Bills? I'm hearing that he had some kind of knee scope or knee surgery. I mean, did we get a wounded duck here and nobody knew about this, and that's why Buffalo let him go?
Tony, thank you for the call from the West Bank. Jeff, why don't you take it and kind of explain what happened today, what we know?
Well, it was a back injury to begin with, and it sounds like, Tony, what happened was he injured his back at some point during the Pro Bowl, and it wasn't such an injury that caused him to miss any time in the game or anything like that, but it obviously was causing him some kind of problem that happened after his weightlifting session, which is what the Saints mainly are doing right now in conditioning. They're banging the weights right now, and it got inflamed somehow. He flew out to the West Coast, and I think it was Dr. Watson, the specialist, saw him, and they probably felt like, hey, this is something we can take care of now. And I think it's important to realize that this was something that Sean Payton said if it happened during the season, he would just treat it. So let's see how it goes. I don't want to panic everybody, but anytime you hear back. It just immediately, it's like having a receiver or a running back with a knee injury.
Yes.
It's the same thing. That's how these guys make their living, propelling themselves into the piles. So I think it's something to consider a red flag, but let's not jump off the deep end of the Crescent City connection.
The article was so surreal, the first one, because like, hey, he's got this issue with his back, and then, oh, they're just going to fix one of his discs, and he's going to be back next week. I was just like, what are you talking about? I've had some major back issues, and I know there's no playing around with just a disc and, oh, I'll be back next week and play some football.
Right.
No, so yeah, I like I said, worried, but not anything I'm gonna lose sleep over. But you're right, this is something you got to think about.
No, you have to watch it very, very closely.
And let's point this out. I don't think they got damaged goods because Buffalo tried to re-sign Jairus Byrd.
Right.
They wanted him back. They knew what he had. They knew him physically.
Yeah. The draft. First chance I get a chance to talk to you guys about the draft. Jeff, your overall thoughts?
Well, I was not too impressed, put it that way. I mean, I thought they did not address some areas that they could have addressed. They seemed like a team that is so veteran laden they could take some chances. Once they got past Cooks, and that was somewhat of a gamble, they traded up to get him. They took a lot of guys I thought that are low risk, potentially high reward type players. We'll see if any of them pan out, but I don't think they addressed the offensive line. And I think there was, some other areas that they could have addressed as well. They took a lot of linebackers and defensive types that look like depth to bolster that depth, which said a lot about their defense to me. They feel like that's still an area they need to get better at. But other than the Cooks deal, there's not a lot to be excited about. I thought the second-round draft pick, I watched him today. He's a big, tall, rangy guy. He reminds me of Michael Hawthorne back in the Hazlitt days.
Interesting.
6'3", he's not very big. He looks like a receiver. But he's a developmental prospect. I don't think they're counting on him to play much this year. Maybe in a specialized situation, but you can't have enough good DBs. The Saints learned that last year.
Yes.
But I still think their secondary's got a lot of question marks. I mean, Patrick Robinson is a guy that I think the general fan base thinks is forgotten about.
Right. Gave up on
right
him.
now, I think he's their starting corner.
Yeah, he came in today as the guy that's his job to lose, supposedly.
And Champ Bailey, I think, is going to be their hybrid guy, their nickel corner. He's not going to be a starter. I'll be surprised if he starts, even though they're raving about him right now.
He looks good. He looks good for a 36-year-old.
He does look good. He's in incredible condition right now. But I think their secondary is still a question mark. They've got a lot of options there. But somebody's got to step forward.
Yes. Well, I would say the majority of the draft, at least right now, would probably be situational depth and special teams players, guys that are going to upgrade the special teams because of the loss of guys like Harper, Jenkins, and Herring.
And they've got a lot of guys coming back from injuries. Victor Butler, a lot of guys like that weren't even in the picture last year. So I do think this team's they've got a lot of depth, more so than they've ever had, and they've got a chance, I think, to be very special because they play in such a weak division.
Yes.
The NFC South, I think, is theirs for the taking. I think they could easily go 5-1 in that division, and that's going to give them a leg up on the rest of the NFC. While Seattle and San Francisco and St. Louis are banging heads, let's face it, the Saints just have to somehow get home field advantage. We say it every year, and I think they're talented enough to do it. But they've got to stay healthy at certain positions, offensive line, and in the secondary, I don't think they can afford too many injuries. Last year, Drew Brees stayed healthy, which he always does, and the defensive line stayed healthy. Those were the two keys to the team last year.
Yeah. Scotty, what can you add on the draft? What are your
I'm going
thoughts?
to say this. I'm in the minority. I actually really like the draft a lot, and I'm going to tell you why, at my end. I didn't like they didn't address the offensive line. I thought they needed another body in there, whether it be a center or tackle. Just give me somebody. They got the 6th rounder. I don't know anything about him. You may, Tavon Rooks. But the other guys that they got 4, 5, and 4, I guess 4, 5, and 5, the 4th and 2 5th rounders, that's, like you said, that's a middle round guy. You hoping one of these guys pulls out. Well, one of them, you know, I used to do that Countdown to Signing Day show, so I followed recruiting pretty closely. And I know if you're great in high school, that's not going to necessarily translate to college or pro. However, I just remember just seeing footage of these guys, Ronald Powell, Kyrie Ford, man, he was an Adonis. I mean, I watched him go side to side. And talking to his linebacker coach I had on last week from Cal, who's also a New Orleans native, Garrett Shashery, he's like, dude, you're getting a guy you're not going to believe. He might be starting in year 2 or 3. Let him go be a missile on special teams this year. And he's a guy that's at a position that the Saints don't have guys signed up for a long time. What if Junior Gillette blows up again and goes 18 sacks? You're not going to be able to afford him. So you got guys right now like Vinny Sinceri coming off a knee injury. You said it. I think the reward could be very high, and you're talking about 3 guys picked between 4th and 5th round right there. If one of them projects to be a starter or comes out and gets lucky, and I think with their pedigree, Ronald Powell was the player of the year coming out of high school just 4 years ago. I really am high on Ronald Powell as well. Now, he hadn't shown at Florida the same thing, but I remember going to the LSU-Florida game this year, sitting on the 10th row, and all I could say was, I had to keep looking at my program, who's number 7, because he was all over the field. Maybe it was just that particular game, but and maybe that's the game Sean Payton saw footage of, but he was an animal. So if one of these 3 guys, and I'm high on Vinny Sinceri, maybe higher than most people, because I love coaches' sons. I love guys that have a nose for the ball. This guy knows the game, and he's got talent as well. Heck, he started under Nick Saban. That's the thinking. If you get one guy to be a starter in the long run, success.
And Cooks is a guy that's going to play right away.
Yes.
Right.
In the past, they've drafted Robert Meacham. He redshirted. Devery Henderson took a while. This is a guy that they're expecting to be a key cog right off the bat, and I think that was critical for them. They needed an impact talent in their perimeter core. I agree with Scott. The rest of these guys were drafted for down the road.
Yes.
They're looking at guys like who are we going to re-sign next year? Who's not going to be around? These are 2- and 3-year projects down the road that could develop into starters.
I don't put too much stock into shorts and T-shirts at OTAs, but Jeff, physically, just looking at some of the guys that were out there, anybody stick out to you?
No, it's so early. It's very difficult to say. Everybody was watching Brandon Coleman, the big, tall receiver that came in from Rutgers. He looks the part. He's another guy that was a big recruit, big-time prospect that Rutgers was able to get. But it's just in this situation where they're just feeling their way along.
Yes.
I mean, they're literally, their heads are swimming right now. These guys are getting everything thrown at them. It's the first installation for them. They'll get another installation in camp and then the third one in camp, learning the offense. I mean, they're just trying to figure it out. So now the one thing I would say that does stand out is Kenny Vaccaro looked great, and he's coming off surgery.
Yes.
Victor Butler looked great coming off surgery. Patrick Robinson, all those guys looked very fluid, cutting. They didn't seem limited at all to me, and I think those are good, very good signs.
You mentioned Brandon Coleman. Scotty, any undrafted free agents that have caught your eye that you think may have a chance to stay?
Well,
the Coleman and Armstrong are the 2 that people talk about.
I'm one of those draft geeks that I thought I go through all rounds, and I'm thinking, I know you did a lot of mock drafts yourself. Coleman, I was going 4th round the entire way, and I look at this. It's kind of like why I like Marquise Lee so much more than I guess other people. Marquise Lee had a down year because his quarterback was terrible.
Yes.
Rutgers' quarterbacking play was awful. And this is a guy that I think has a legitimate chance to make the team. Now, he's going to be in a fight with other guys that are probably equal talent. We're talking Nick Toon, who we're still waiting to come on, and guys like that. But I like them. Matt Armstrong's going to have every opportunity to make this team. He's the center from Grand Valley State, obviously the same place Tim Lolito went. There's other guys. The running back from Sam Houston State is Tim Flanders.
Flanders, right.
I've got footage on him. He's a bowling ball, man, and he's a hitter, and he's got a little speed to go along with it. So there's guys, that one's made it every year for the last, 6, 7? And we had 6, actually 7 when you count Ryan Griffin finally getting signed. In October, that was 7 undrafted free agents that made this team last year. You got to expect at least 1 or 2 is going to make the team.
You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Each and every Thursday night, our live broadcast right here on WLAE, 6 to 7 o'clock. On Friday nights, it's a rebroadcast at 10 p.m. on WLAE TV and also Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll continue the conversation. We'll talk a little about what's going on with the Saints, also what's going on with the college baseball, as well as we'll get into the Pelicans as well. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports.
Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital is literally saving kids' lives.
It's a very special place, friendly place.
To see the kids that they're helping on a daily basis was unbelievable.
Families never receive a bill from St. Jude.
Discoveries made at St. Jude are freely shared.
The hardest cancer cases in the world go to St. Jude. We won't stop until no child dies from cancer.
Join us.
Join us
in supporting Hoops for St. Jude.
Visit stjude.org/hoops to find out how.
We can beat this. The spill in the Gulf is a catastrophe.
But we will solve it.
This is not a Gulf Coast issue.
This is a national problem that requires a national solution.
But what can you do to help?
What do you have to offer? Your voice.
Speak up.
Add your name to the petition
demanding restoration and protection
of America's Gulf Coast.
Sign it.
Share it.
Be the one.
Be the one. RestoreTheGulf.com.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. A great panel for you tonight. Jeff Duncan of the New Orleans Times-Picayune and my colleague over at WGSO 990 AM, Scott Alexander. Also, folks, again, you can call in, be part of the program, 504-866-3200. This week, Malcolm Glazer, owner of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Manchester United, the soccer team, passed away. And it brings to mind the thought process of, okay, Tom Benson getting up in age. I talked to Arnie Filko back when he was involved with the franchise, and one of the things he was working on way back then, this is pre-Katrina, was a succession plan for the team. I don't know if it ever came to fruition, but Jeff, you wrote about this, I believe, last year, about the succession plan that the Bensons have in case of, again, the untimely death of Tom Benson. Could you kind of elaborate on that and tell us where the Saints are right now?
Well, the plan is done. I mean, they've got a plan they've been working on for years, and I think we just now finally reported on it, but I think it's been done for a while. And the basic gist of it is they're going to be run by a trust, the Benson Family Trust, which will have, I think, majority ownership of the team. The minority ownership will be the Benson family, which is the 3 R's as they're known. Mm-hmm. Renee is his daughter, and her 2 children, Ryan and Rita. Of course, everyone knows Rita Benson LeBlanc, mm-hmm. who's very involved with the team. They will have a minority share of the team, but it'll be run basically by the trust, which the executor will be probably Dennis Lauscha mm-hmm. and Mickey Loomis. I mean, those are the 2 main decision makers in the building right now. Even with Tom Benson around, yes. At his age, he's not as involved day to day as he used to be. And who would be? He's 86, will be 87 in July. So I think it's very good news locally because that means the team's going to stay here. It's not going to be sold to outside mm-hmm. interests. But I think it's also very practical of them to have that already in place. Everyone I've talked to in the building says they expect this operation, the way it's going now, to continue on exactly the way it is in the future. In other words, I don't think Rita or Renee Benson is going to come in and start running the team. This team's going to be run by a board of directors with all the key figureheads right now still involved.
Is that happening anywhere else in the NFL where a board of directors or a trust would run a team? I can't think of one off the top of my head.
It's happened in other sports. The Boston Red Sox have been run that way. It's happened in a lot of other organizations, but not in the NFL as far as I know. Right now, the Buffalo Bills are being run that mm-hmm. way, but they're going to be sold.
Yes.
So it's very rare, but I think the decision makers that the Saints have on top, I think are the key people that, like Dennis Lauscha, Mickey Loomis we talked about before. Those are the guys calling the shots right now. But it will be interesting to see. I mean, let's face it, the politics and dynamics change mm-hmm. In the future when politics get involved and when powers and egos. But right now, everybody seems to operate on the same page out there, and that's a good thing.
Scott, anything you can add?
I'm just learning that the 3 R's is no longer reading, writing, and arithmetic. I guess it's Rita, Renee, and Ryan. So, yeah, I mean, the Saints are going to be fine. They're right now a well-oiled machine. Mickey Loomis is doing his thing. He's got great player personnel. I don't see any drop-off whatsoever.
Guys, the city lost Super Bowl 52 to Minneapolis. I think, as I mentioned last week, it was a gut punch for the city. It was very surprising, considering, obviously, the presentation, which we heard was flawless, one of the best presentations that we've ever put up as a city. The 2018 Tricentennial celebration, trying to allow the NFL to piggyback on that. Scott, I'll start with you first. Your thoughts on the overall process, and I guess the big question is, will this city get another Super Bowl before the Saints leases up in 2025?
Eric, I'm worried about it. I was on air when it happened, as you know, and I had, having lived in Atlanta, I knew a lot of the media that were there. I used to cover years ago when they were at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead, the owners meeting, and so I had 12 people I talked to between the night before and the morning of, literally 12, and one of them said Minneapolis, and I should have listened to that one because that's the one I respect the most. But I mean, all other 11, not just said New Orleans, but felt really comfortable. So I went on air that morning at 11 saying, okay, I'm going to give this at about 95 to 97% that I think it's New Orleans, where I wouldn't have said that the day before. I would have said 50-50 because I know the new stadium track record, 7 for 7. I wasn't looking at, when the Saints get down or New Orleans gets down to the final 3, they've been, 9 for 9 or 10 for 10, I guess, before that. Well, I was thinking, okay, new stadium. But then when I got the feel from all the media around, it just shows you how little we really do know. And when I got word that it was Minneapolis, it was that gut punch. Corey said he could hear it in my voice on the air because it was right at the end of the show and I was expecting good news, and it really wasn't. And you're right. Atlanta, I just saw just a few days ago. I was right there where they have broken ground. It looks like a giant crater on the moon right next to the Georgia Dome right now. They will get a Super Bowl. There's no question about it.
2019 is theirs.
It is theirs, period. And that stadium is, of course, going to be state of the art. San Diego, you can count on that one too. And you know what? New Orleans is the best city for a Super Bowl. There's no doubt about it. But when now you're seeing 8 for 8, and you're talking about places like Minneapolis and Indianapolis, any city that builds a stadium, they will come.
Right. Jeff, were you as surprised as most of us were here in the city that we did not get the Super Bowl for 2018?
Oh, yeah. I don't think there's any doubt. I was just like Scott. I felt like it was 95% chance. Everything I'd heard from my sources about Minneapolis was they had holes in their funding, their financials were a mess, and they were a year away from getting their act together with the NFL owners. But I think what started happening, the dynamics changed internally in the league, and they started thinking, well, Atlanta's coming online. We're going to get bottlenecked here with these new stadiums that we have to reward. And what's happening is that the owners want to reward their peers. They've all been challenged to push for these new stadiums, and a new stadium helps them. It's a revenue sharing plan. Yes. It helps enhances their bottom line, and they're going to always reward any market that gets a new stadium. But I do think it was surprising that it happened. As I wrote last week, I feel like Minneapolis would have been fine with 2019.
Yes.
They were just happy to get a Super Bowl. But I found it surprising. Now, it was very close. From talking to people at the Saints, the Saints think they had 15 votes in that room. So they must have lost, just by a hair. 17-15. So it was close. So it wasn't like it was everybody voted for Minneapolis.
It went to 4 votes.
Right. You get it, and the Saints, I think, felt very confident, and the New Orleans group felt very confident. Like you said, it was the best presentation everybody involved said they'd ever seen. So it obviously didn't come down to that. It didn't come down to financials, because New Orleans and Indianapolis apparently had a better financial package. It came down to one thing: the owners wanting to reward their peers.
No lingering bad effects from the blackout, in your opinion?
No, that had no factor at all.
None at all.
None at all. But it also tells you that the 300-year. The Tricentennial meant nothing to the
Nothing to
them. And I think there was a feeling among New Orleans officials that, hey, this is the game we want. We've got a great history with the league. They'll give us the game we want, and then we'll step to the sideline, and we'll be a decade without a game. Now, I don't know when the other game is going to come here.
I think it's going to be difficult. You look at the stadiums, as you mentioned, Scotty, that are lined up right now. Again, cities are going to have to put up. And if they don't put up, then there's a possibility of relocation down the line for some of these cities if they have subpar stadiums in order for their teams to play in. You look at where the lease is, 2025. Even if you get close, unless you're going to have an extension of that lease, I think it's going to be very difficult. Maybe 2023. Normally, the NFL will not award a Super Bowl to a city that doesn't have a long-term lease with a team.
No.
So that means you got to be maybe 2 years or 3 years out, maybe trying to get a new lease with the team. And then the other factor that's out there, the new dynamic that's out there now is public-private partnership. The public is putting up part of the money, usually half. In a lot of cases, the owner's putting up half, or in some cases, all the money. And in Louisiana, we have foot the bill in the past. It is if you check online and you look at the deal that Tom Benson has signed with Bobby Jindal in the state of Louisiana, it is one of the best, if not the best deal in sports for both the New Orleans Arena and the Superdome. So the question is going forward, can we have another Super Bowl? Can we keep this team without a commitment to a new stadium? And then when that new stadium is built, whoever's going to be in charge of that Benson Trust or whoever's going to be that triumphant that's going to be in charge of the team, are they going to be willing to ante up?
Well, you're talking a lot of things can happen.
Oh yeah,
between now
no
and then.
doubt.
Well, we're talking about Tom Benson could not be around. Drew Brees might not be around. Sean Payton. Well, who knows what's going to happen with the
23
Saints?
to 25, more than likely none of those are going to be around.
Right. So we're talking about a whole different dynamic.
Heck, I might not be around.
Yeah, none of us could be around. Who knows? Who knows? But I do think that look, the league's history here is well documented. They love coming here. This had nothing. This was not a slight at New Orleans. And I think we all take it that way.
Every citizen feels that way.
We all feel that way, right? Because we all love the city and everybody.
Yeah. And I think everybody thought it was a slam dunk.
Well, there's no question. I don't think there's any doubt. They were the prohibitive favorite, according to everybody you talk to. But I think things changed a little bit, and I know that Mark Wilf got up in the room when he had his chance to speak to ownership.
The owner of the Vikings.
The owner of the Vikings. He and his brother, Ziggy Wilf.
Right.
And they got up and challenged all the owners that got new stadiums recently. Jerry Jones, every owner that got a new stadium, the New York owners, the Maras and the Tishes, and said, you got your stadium, you got your Super Bowl after you got your stadium. We won ours, and that had a powerful effect. And I think something to think about going forward when we talked about the succession plan, who is going to be that person for the Saints in the future when Tom Benson is 86? He's not going to be up to that even if he stays around for a while. Who's going to be that person that stands up in the room and challenges? That's a question I think that's unanswered right now.
Well, not just that. Who's going to be that person that negotiates with the next governor going forward on the new lease and a possibility of not just a new Superdome, but a new Smoothie King Center? I mean, when you look at and you've got so much wrapped up in that complex, and you don't have a tremendous amount of room in the city to be able to look and say, okay, where can you put a new stadium? Where you can put a new stadium complex? Pretty much, you're kind of tied to Porter Street at this point. So it's going to be interesting what happens there as well.
Yeah, I think they're stuck there. And look, the Dome. This was not a slight at the Superdome. People took it the wrong way and felt like New Orleans has to build a new stadium. That's not. They don't. That is a new stadium.
It's state of the art right now. They updated it.
2014 it is.
Yeah.
It's brand new. And part of the reason why we got the last Super Bowl was because of the investment by the state of Louisiana in the upgrades. But you're right. As long as Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota are footing $500 million towards $1 billion stadium, they're going to get rewarded, even if they are in an area that's going to get 19-degree weather in the middle of February.
And I was watching Fargo the other night and just thinking, you know what? There'll be a whiteout like that there as well. I mean, it could be. I mean, they're not even worried about the weather at this point. It has nothing to do with the walkability. It has nothing to do with how great of a city is in terms of their ability to host. It comes down to you build it, they'll come.
But I do think if they get a disastrous cold weather event, that'll change.
They got to rethink it. I would agree.
So well, Atlanta was known for great weather. Keep this in mind for that time of year. And they had that one Super Bowl about 14, 15 years ago, Rams-Titans. And I remember it well. I was living there. And it just turned out to be the worst weather day Atlanta's ever had. My whole time there.
Bad luck.
Ice storm. And they hadn't got a scent of it yet. You would have thought as a southern town on the rise that they would have been back. But I love the point you brought up about the sentimentality of the tricentennial, 300 years. The NFL is like, this is our thing. We're not worried about your city. The Olympic Games did the same thing to Greece. Remember back in 1996, awarded to Atlanta of all places, which was like everybody across the world was like, Atlanta? It's not even Chicago, New York, or LA. What are you talking about? Whereas Greece was the sentimental favorite because 100 years earlier, obviously, was the beginning of the modern Olympics in Greece, 1896. So I guess the people that are the powers that be don't really care that much about that kind of sentimentality.
It's our party. It's not theirs.
Right.
But everybody thought, in addition to that, the financials were weighted in New Orleans' favor.
Right.
And that's what talks to the NFL, and that's why it was so surprising.
Do we see another Super Bowl in that building?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think they'll get one in the early 20s, but it's going to be a while. The other thing that's come into play here, and we've talked about it, these other cold weather cities are emboldened now. Philadelphia's going to bid. Denver's going to bid.
Oh, yeah.
Washington,
they're
D.C.
emboldened, yeah.
They're all going to want to get in line. So it just becomes more and more competitive. And it seems like what Roger Goodell, part of his legacy is to be, hey, I opened up the Super Bowl to everybody. It's going to be part of his legacy. And I think he likes this. I think he likes going to these new markets.
Right. Scott, what do you think? Do you see another Super Bowl in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome?
Well, I had said it right away. I thought they were going to get one within the next 3 years of the bidding. And I seemed like people were trying to convince me otherwise, and I started to believe maybe not. But I think you're right. I think once this new stadium thing kind of slows down, they're going to realize, hey, New Orleans hadn't had one in 10 years. You got to go back there. It's just one of the sites they got to go at least once a decade.
Right.
We're thinking, hey, every 5 years, please, but
never again. Every 5.
No.
It'll be once a decade now.
Right.
I will say, and I don't want to be the pessimist, but I will say, unless there is a long-term lease with the Saints that's going to be in place before 2025, and at least a plan, much like we saw between Tulane Stadium and the Superdome, to build a new stadium. I say we don't get one in this building, but before the end of the Saints lease. I think there's a lot of dynamics that are going to have to be in place before New Orleans has a chance to be able to host another Super Bowl. And it's a shame because we are the best place to host these type of big-time events.
Well, I think they'll get it. I really do. I mean, that's a long way off now.
Oh, no, it is.
We're talking about over a decade from now. So I do think there's plenty of time for them to negotiate. Dennis Lausch is the lead negotiator for the Saints right now. So he has a good relationship, at least with the powers that be right now. I don't think that's going to be a problem getting a long-term deal. But I don't know if we'll ever see one as one-sided as it is right now.
Well, I do think it's incumbent upon the state to continue to move forward with upgrades to the dome. Would you guys agree with that? Don't just have them on paper. I think if you have this building, you have this shell, you've upgraded, you've modernized it, because new stadiums are coming online with the most modern technology out there. I do think that, again, the state of Louisiana, the city of New Orleans has to keep moving forward in upgrading that facility so we don't get the reputation of saying, you know what, old building, old technology now, it's outdated.
No, you made the best point just now. The sweetheart deal that the Superdome's been operating under right now, it's unheard of. And it's because the Saints were threatening to move. Right now, the Saints are a mini powerhouse. I mean, it's funny how winning changes a lot of things, your environment. And I think because of that, the Saints aren't going to get quite a good deal to go to the Dome. Stay in the Dome.
This is one of the things that's really kind of the hidden secrets to the New Orleans Saints' success is that deal.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they have cash up front. I remember covering the Saints back in the early Hazlitt era and Randy Mueller, and they had difficulty signing free agents strictly because they didn't have the cash on hand to give out the free agent signing bonuses. Now you see them go out and just throw money at Jarris Byrd. They throw money to some of these guys because they've got cash galore out there. They're free spending, and they've become a very high-profile team, one of the healthier financial teams in the entire NFL. That's crazy when you think about the size of the market they're in and the relative, income that comes into this market. I mean, this was a market that I wrote many stories over the years. They'll never survive. The NFL will never survive here. Obviously, it's thriving.
Well, a couple just quick points about the current lease. Saints are guaranteed $12 million a year profit. As far as the naming rights go, 50% of the naming rights from Mercedes-Benz goes against that $12 million, but 50% does not. That goes right into the Saints' pocket. Also, if the Saints would have delivered a Super Bowl for this city, $5 million would have been given to Tom Benson for that Super Bowl. So, yeah, you're right. They're pretty flush with cash, not to mention the leasing of the Benson Towers and everything else that goes along with that, as well as the ability to be able to profit off non-Saints and non-Pelican events at those facilities.
To me, they're the closest thing in the NFL to the Green Bay Packers. And I've argued this before with Saints officials, they're almost owned by the state of Louisiana.
Yes.
And they should be treated as such because everybody that goes to those games, all their money is going straight to the Saints. And that's why I always laugh when people say, oh, Tom Benson, and this is not to disparage Tom Benson at all, but for them to say, oh, he's footing the money to pay for these free agents. No, that's all of us footing the money. That's the NFL with the great broadcast network deals that they have.
Yes.
That's where all the money's coming from.
Sure.
So it's easy to fork it out when it's coming from some other source.
Right. Does the conversation need to start now, Scotty? I'll start with you on maybe looking down the line at what we're going to do in terms of the facility, whether we're going to continue to retrofit or whether we're going to build a new stadium.
You said it best. Where do you go, Eric? I mean, honestly, because if you try to stay where you are, where do you play in the meantime where you're building the stadium? Right. That's you're not going to finish a stadium in a year. That's the great question. Do you do what the Atlanta Braves did and just go a little bit out in the suburbs where most of the people? Well, this isn't Atlanta. Most of the people aren't really in the suburbs here.
You probably have to play at LSU if you had to do something, which was the plan originally. The Pelicans a little bit more of a question mark. Where do you put an NBA team at this point? But the
Oklahoma City will probably take them.
Right. The only other place is along the river where that Market Street power plant is, and there are some big plans for that in terms of where the next phase of the convention center. A hotel with meeting rooms and everything along that line. So there's just not a lot of geography to be able to have a new stadium.
Well, look, they just put $360 million into this facility. They're not going to run and build another stadium anytime soon. That thing's going to be there, I think, for at least another decade minimum. There's too big an investment right now to worry about whether they've got the newest ribbon board compared to Jerry Jones' stadium. That's not what's going to get them a Super Bowl. What's going to get them a Super Bowl is a good plan like they had, and frankly, just the other owners agreeing to want to come back here. It comes down to the owners and whether they want to get involved or not. We learned that last week more than ever.
Regional baseball starting this weekend. I've talked about it on my radio show. Basketball, my gosh, when March Madness comes along and you don't have the plethora of Louisiana teams that we used to have when we were coming up in the 70s and the 80s and even in the early 90s.
Well, yeah, what happened to Louisiana college basketball?
It is
dropped off the earth.
Off the face of the earth. But baseball's back. To be able to have ULL, Southeastern, and LSU in regionals this weekend is something to behold. Scotty, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts, first of all, on the college baseball here in South Louisiana, and what do you expect to happen this weekend? I got to tell you what, I'm really impressed with the way Southeastern has handled this. They feel like they're giant killers. They are so happy to have the opportunity to go play at Alec Box and to play LSU. They're no shrinking violets there in Hammond.
No, they're not. And they have a pitcher that has a 1.72 ERA. He's 10-2. Katera. I'm going to say this. LSU's going to have their hands full. They're throwing Jared Poche, their freshman. They're going to save. Well, I had Paul Maneri on yesterday. He hates this. I'm not saving him.
Right.
We were just playing him the second day.
Right.
I'm like, whatever. You're playing for the better seeded team. But the point being is LSU is absolutely peaking at the right time. Hey, Southeastern Louisiana, all credit to you. You're a big underdog in this game. Anything can happen. It's baseball. Unlike football, you have a better opportunity, especially if you have a good pitcher. But what you mentioned, baseball in Southeast Louisiana, or just South Louisiana, how about that? ULL. They're no fluke. I've watched this team a bunch this season. They've got great pitching, and man, can they whack the ball. That team can hit. But LSU, they're calling cards pitching and defense. And now the hitting has started to catch up with both those things. Guys that were struggling a little bit early in the year, Alex Bregman, I wouldn't say struggling, but struggling for the freshman of the year in the country last year, I would say so. But they're all coming around. But that defense is the calling card, unlike 2 seasons ago when they had no defense in the outfield and Stony Brook upset them in the Super Regional. That's not going to happen. If anybody that watched the SEC tournament watched them in Hoover, this defense can track down anything. And I'll tell you what, any good coach will tell you, if you can save runs, it's just as valuable as hitting them in.
I think Maneri has looked at what's going on with the stadium in Omaha and has tried to build a team to try to fit that stadium.
No question about that. I mean, Stevenson and Laird out there. I mean, that's the thing. When you had last year, you felt really good about the team that had won more games than any team in LSU history. I mean, think about that statement. More regular season games than you had. You had the whole combination. Your defense has improved, not as good as this year because Rafe Rhymes is not playing left field. But you had guys that were veteran hitters like Rhymes and Mason Katz, but they were pretty much fruitless in that big stadium because there was no long balls. They only had 3 the entire World Series. So he's building a team that can go station to station a little better, and it's finally coming together. I mean, because early in the year it wasn't. They were trying to eke out victories, even lost that game to Tulane. I mean, so it was rough for them for a bit, but you know what? They've been steady, especially the last few months, and they've won every series since that Florida sweep, except for the 2-1 loss to Texas A&M on the road.
Right. Well, it was like that game where they got 27 runs. It kind of opened up the floodgates, and they haven't lost a game since then.
Northwestern, right?
Yeah, Northwestern State. It just seemed like that just all of a sudden the pressure was off. and they're hitting the ball. We know this team's going to play defense. We know they're going to pitch well. It really comes down to the bats, like Scott said. And I'm really looking forward. I'm going to Lafayette for the regional, like I said earlier. I'm looking forward to seeing that environment. I'm sure it's going to be crazy. It's going to be a cauldron. And look, Alex Box, that's the best home field advantage in college baseball. They're 29-5 there this year. I think Southeastern's up against it. They're giant killers, and they know it. But anything can happen if you get into the bullpen. That's the key. Is whose bullpen's going to pitch well if you get in one of those pitching matchups.
Do we believe in the third starters into the bullpen for the Tigers? They played. Let's face it. They pitched well in the SEC tournament. Do you think that can carry over into the regionals? Possible super regional, and then into Omaha?
I mean, jury's out. Let's find out. I mean, who knows? I mean, that's the question for this team, and it's going to be the question in these kind of small series like that. But we know they got two aces, and that goes a long way in college baseball.
Rick Jones last week announced that he is retiring from Tulane. You've covered him a long time, Jeff. Your thoughts on Rick Jones, his legacy, what he's done at Tulane, and what's next for that program?
Well, he built the program as it is, and that stadium out there is largely there because of what Rick Jones did, elevating the program. No question, the program plateaued in the last few years. This is a critical hire for Rick Dixon. I mean, this is a program. I thought my colleague Trey Iles had a great column about it the other day. This is a program that can win a national championship. You can't really say that for football or basketball there, but they could win a national title in baseball if they get the right hire. And I would just point him towards my alma mater, University of Louisville. Tom Jurich knows how to hire. That's his great strength as an AD. Don't get caught up in just hiring a Tulane guy. That happens so often, and there's a lot of good candidates there for them to pick from. But you've got to hire the best person to lead this program. This program's got a lot of resources and assets. But they need a spark, and they need somebody to excite the Tulane fan base again. Get the best person, and if that happens to be somebody that's got ties to the Tulane program, Rick Jones, then more power to them. But get the best person, because this is a critical hire for them. They put a lot of resources into the baseball program, hasn't delivered lately.
You've known Rick Jones for a long time. Your thoughts?
I have. I want to comment on one thing first, because I didn't know you went to Louisville. Tom Jurich does know how to hire. I'm going to say this. I was with Rick Pitino for that whole week before. He told us he was taking, because I was working in the NCAA tournament with Tim Brando. He told us he was taking the Michigan job. He went to Michigan in between games, came back, I'm taking it. But I have this interview with Louisville, I'm going to still go. Tom Jurich floored him, turned it around, and Louisville's program since that time in all sports has been fantastic, literally all sports. So I think the same can happen with Tulane, especially in baseball. But Rick Jones, like you said, I have known him a long time. I remember he came up to visit Georgia, and I got to see him up there because he got offered the job and
That's
took
why that
the
stadium
job.
got built.
Yeah. And I'm going to say this. I remember he was like, oh, my goodness. I realized when Vince Dooley's wife, and Vince was the AD at Georgia at the time, Jan took me around, sweet lady, but she said, yeah, that's where Jim Donnan used to live, and they put a for sale sign when he had his first 4-loss season. He was like, oh, my goodness, this is rough around here. So he said, maybe I don't have it so bad at Tulane. So he stayed. My memories of Rick will always be the 2001, obviously, Super Regional to go to the World Series against LSU. Obviously, I'm an alumni of LSU, but I am a former bat boy for Tulane. So after LSU had won 5 titles in 10 years, I said, you know what, I'm going to root for Tulane today. And I know all the LSU fans are going to be upset with me, but point being is I wanted to see them go somewhere. And you know what, that was some of the most dramatic, unbelievable moments in all of Tulane history. And I'm going to go as far as this. I think Rick Jones is the most influential and perhaps best coach they've had in any sport in their athletic history. And I don't know if Rick Jones watches your show or not.
Well, he should.
But well done. I think you've done a phenomenal job, and you put them back on the map and built this program, and they can only go up from here.
I would agree. And again, I know that stadium's is named here, there, and everywhere, but they got to find a place somewhere to be able to honor Rick Jones on that stadium. Guys, the big question going forward is Southeastern, ULL, LSU, they can take advantage of tops. With the limited amount of scholarships, the limited amount of, and the cost of Tulane, can this program turn around?
Sure. I mean, look at what Rice is doing. You could do it at Tulane. There's no question. They've done it. They've done it there. Now, it's more competitive now, college baseball, than ever. But that's a great facility out there. There's great athletes down here. The problem right now is, they're competing. You're right. The program at UL Lafayette has really taken off, and so they're going to have to compete more than ever, but they're in a much better conference now, and I think the sky's the limit there. They got to make the right hire. Rick Dixon has to make this hire a home run because they expect to be good in baseball at Tulane.
Yes.
That's one that they put their resources into.
Sure.
And they have not been as good as I know Rick Jones wants them to be
Which
of
is
late.
part of the reason why he's had the health problems.
There's no
he
question.
admitted it. You know, again, the worry about the program. Scott, what do you think? I mean, it's a tough nut for Tulane. When you start looking at the advantages that the state schools have as opposed to what they have.
It's remarkable. I mean, think about this with college. Obviously, baseball, you have partial scholarships for the most part. You only get a certain number, and you chop them up.
I think it's 11.7.
Yeah, and think about this. On a full roster, I mean, you're trying to get guys from New York to compete, and then maybe you might have to give a couple fulls, and if one of those guys gets hurt, then you're wasting it. It's hard, and Tulane costs $60,000 a year. Am I correct on that? And if you give a guy a half, he still has to come up with $30,000, so it's an unfair disadvantage. And you mentioned Rice. From what I've told, Rice and Vanderbilt have huge endowments where they're giving more, like, I guess, other kind of scholarships where they can get more guys in. Tulane's got going in with a water pistol against an AK-47 when you're competing with state schools like ULL and LSU that are attracting better athletes, because you know what, they can afford it if they're not going to get a full scholarship. It's a little less money.
But you should if you can target those guys, I mean, you can find guys all over the country they're going to want to go to school at Tulane. So you've got to target. You're right. There's no question about it. But that's something that they can sell over ULL or Southeastern Louisiana.
Right.
I mean, you get a Tulane education.
Yes.
You come down here, you can recruit from families that maybe are better off, that can afford that. That's going to help them get that college education at the university.
Guys, I only got a few minutes left. I'll give you each 1 minute. Will Eric Gordon be with this team when this team opens up this season, or by the All-Star break? Scotty, I'll take you
That's a loaded
first.
question. I'm going to say this. Yes, he will be on this team because he is impossible to unload right now. I mean, I'm saying you can't even say, hey, we'll give you Eric Gordon just to take the relief on our salary cap. I think Eric Gordon is a very good, serviceable player. I think he's a $8 to $10 million player. I think he's very good. But $15 million just handcuffs you on everything else you need to do. You need a three that can actually shoot. They don't have one on the team, at least one with any kind of experience or anybody that anybody else is scared of. I like Eric Gordon. I just don't think he's been a good fit here whatsoever. And from what I saw from Tyreek Evans at the end of the season in his heart, because I wasn't sure of that either until they got a shot, and then I watched him very closely in post-game interviews. This guy wants to be here, and I want guys that want to be here for the city of New Orleans.
About a minute.
I think he'll be here, strictly from what Scott said. You can't move him. Who's going to take him?
The only way he does is if he renounces that last year. Then that gives the Pelicans a wiggle room to be able to try to move him.
Maybe, but he hasn't even played as well as he did before, so that's a problem. And they've got duplicate parts in that perimeter and that backcourt, glaring hole at small forward, and their center position's still a little bit of an issue. So
and no
I don't know what's going on. And nothing to fix it.
And the
guy
you're laying your hat on as your draft pick now is Pierre Jackson. Oh, by the way, another guard. And that's the problem. And it's going to be interesting to see what Dell Demps does now to try to change things, because he's kind of overloaded the guard position. They got to make some moves in this offseason, because I think the clock's on both of these guys.
Well, and the other thing they've got a concern with is Eric Gordon didn't sound too infatuated with being a six-man.
No, not at all.
So they've got a locker room issue there.
Yep, no doubt. Guys, thanks so much for being with us. Certainly appreciate both you guys joining us on the panel once again. Jeff Duncan of the New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com, and Scott Alexander. You can hear him 1 to 3 on WGSO WGSO 990 AM. And also, thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night on Pelican Sports Television in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette, and right here on WLAE at 10 o'clock. You can also catch me on the radios weekdays 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. on WGSO 990 AM. You can also follow me on Twitter at Eric_Asher. If you missed any of the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports, you could catch those at ericasher.com as well. And of course, you can download my podcast and listen live at ericasher.com also. Special thanks to the WLAE production staff, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Donovan Joseph, Nyla Jones, and of course my producer, director, William Hill. For Jeff Duncan, for Scott Alexander, my name is Eric Asher. I thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, make sure you tune in next Thursday night, 6 p.m. right here on WLAE for Inside New Orleans Sports. Have a great evening, New Orleans.
Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by the Union Capital Corporation, Natel's Air Conditioning and Heating, a proud sponsor of the St. Jude Dream Home, and Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House.